Hello, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. I'm trying to work through my scraps by colorway this year in 2025, and I recently finished up a quilt inspired by an ancient mosaic tile floor that was unearthed. When I finished up that quilt, I did have a lot of these 4-strip units, and I'm going to just make those into a quilt. So I sat down at the sewing machine and just started sewing pieces together. Now, a lot of these strip sets were cut and they were about 8 inches wide, so it looked like I was going to be making some 8-inch blocks from my scraps. Here's a little cheat that I used. I had wider pieces of this dark green and I stitched on little strips of the light green. I'm just going to cut that dark green down the middle to make narrower strips. Again, I'm cutting these into approximately 8-inch lengths to make 8-inch blocks. When I'm sewing scraps together, I do like to start with the larger pieces first and then move down to the smaller pieces. I continued sewing scrap pieces together and joining different groups, different colors to make 8-inch blocks. To make this go a little bit faster, I did keep my iron and wool pressing mat right next to me to make it easy just to press and keep sewing. When I felt like I had pieces of green fabric that were large enough, I did decide to add a white 2.5-inch strip to the sides to get my full 8 inches there. I just wanted to make sure I did have enough for 8-inch blocks. To trim these blocks, I made sure my ruler was overlapping 8 inches on the left and the bottom. I trimmed off the top and the right-hand side. I flipped the block around and lined up my ruler on the left and the bottom with 8 inches and trimmed off the opposite 2 sides. I continued cutting out these 8-inch blocks. When I was done, I only had a few. I didn't have enough for a complete quilt top. I still had quite a bit of this leftover green backing fabric, so I started cutting that down into 8-inch squares. I thought that would look nice with these 8-inch scrappy quilt blocks. I was short a block or two on the dark green, so I sewed some pieces together to complete enough 8-inch squares. Once I had all my pieces, I was ready to stitch these together. I'm just going to be stitching a scrap block together with a dark green square, and we're going to just proceed and do like a checkerboard quilt, alternating the dark green with the scrappy block. And remember, when you're sewing blocks together, make sure you sew right sides together instead of wrong side to right side. I had to pick this little seam out and stitch it correctly. And I'm trying to use up all the black thread I have in my stash, and it kind of made a mess because of the thread. I just used Scotch tape to pick that thread out of my fabric. It works really well. A lint roller works too. Once I got that fixed, it was time to start sewing these pairs together into rows and completing this quilt top. when it was time to join 2 rows together, I had the white strip, that 2.5-inch strip, I had those facing each other. I thought, well, based on the number of rows I had, that would be an interesting, almost like sashing, but zigzag sashing. I will leave the exact time this took me in the video description. It went together so quick, so easy, but that was because I already had many pieces of these scrap blocks left over from the prior quilt. So just an interesting note that you can use these leftovers and just put them together into scrap blocks, and this alternating with a solid block and a scrap block makes for a very nice quilt. To make this quilt a nice size for myself, I wanted to make it a bit wider. I am just cutting that light green and that dark green into 2.5-inch strips, trying to use it all up. I'm making nice long strips that are long enough for this quilt, and I am going to sew those strips to the sides of my quilt. I also really wanted to use up this old green quilt backing. That light green and that dark green, I've had them in my stash for a long time. I got everything pressed nice and flat and trimmed off any little extra overhang edges. And here is our finished quilt top. I know my last video, based on that 1,000-year-old mosaic tile floor, I thought it looked like Minecraft. I was wrong. This quilt truly looks like a Minecraft quilt. It's so crazy. I don't know if you know about Minecraft. It's a fun game. Lots of kids love it, but this reminds me so much of that game. Thanks so much for joining me today. I do hope to see you back again real soon.